Well, thank you so much for joining in this panel discussion about the long-term vision for the use of emerging technologies in Parliament. I had prepared a short introduction, but given the time, I will move towards inviting each one of you to briefly introduce yourselves and your relation to the particular topic on how to use artificial intelligence in Parliament. This is the third session on artificial intelligence in Parliament's meetings with Secretary General and clerks Parliament around this topic. So without further ado, allow me to invite Graciela Báez Ricardez, the Secretary General of the Chamber of Deputies in Mexico, for her to introduce herself to us before we start this conversation. Graciela, please, can you introduce yourself in 1 minute, please?
¿Qué tal? Buenos días. Bueno, primero que nada, decir que para mí es un honor estar aquí con ustedes. El Parlamento de México tiene muy poco tiempo que tiene un servicio de carrera y eso implica que yo llevo en esta posición 5 años y es probable que la deje en los próximos 8 meses porque vamos a tener elecciones, como ustedes saben, presidenciales. En junio de 2024 se va a renovar el Parlamento y es posible que deje esta posición. Lo digo esto porque, bueno, mi experiencia es limitada comparada a la de ustedes, entonces pues la verdad es que estoy aquí para escucharlos, para aprender de ustedes, pero también para compartirles los avances que hemos tenido recientemente tanto en el servicio de carrera como en temas relacionados con inteligencia artificial que nos van a hacer precisamente más productivos. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias. Thank you, Graciela, for your introduction. James, would you like to introduce yourself to us in 1 minute and share a little bit on your vision about this topic?
Sure. Thank you very much, Luís, and it's a great pleasure to participate in the panel and to engage with colleagues in the seminar today. I'm currently the Clerk of Bills in our legislation office in the House of Commons. Until very recently, I was working as one of the senior leadership team in our Select Committee team, which is a big part of the House of Commons service in the United Kingdom. And from the 1st of April, I'll be returning to the Select Committee team as Managing Director in moving into that new role. I'm very much here to learn. I think, as Graciela has said, we're very much, I think, in the foothills of understanding some of the opportunities and also some of the risks around AI. It's something that our select committees have engaged with and have begun thinking about, and I'm sure I will come on to talk a little bit about the work of one of our select committees in looking at AI governance. But very much here to learn, and I'm very much here to try and establish kind of networks of cooperation and collaboration on understanding AI and as I say, the opportunities and threats moving forward. So looking forward to this afternoon's session.
Thank you so much, James, for your introduction. Jonathan, would you like to introduce yourself to us?
Yeah, hi. So my name's Jonathan from NovaWorks here in Australia. We've been working with parliaments around the world for the last about 20 plus years, and we sort of do a lot of consultancy work and implementation work as well around digitization, around cloud services, and also specifically around the emergence of artificial intelligence as well. So planning out strategies, planning out governance, planning out a whole range of things around that, and transparency. So we're sort of very much focused around that sort of, strategic space, but also looking at the practical use cases and implementations of those as well, and what we've been able to do with that.
Thank you so much, Jonathan, for your introduction. Márcio Tancredi from the Federal Senate of Brazil. Márcio, would you like to introduce yourself to us?
Bom dia para você, Luís. Boa tarde para os outros participantes, né? Eventualmente tem alguém que está no outro fuso horário. Eu gostaria de agradecer a oportunidade de estar aqui falando, né, sobre a experiência do Senado em relação à inteligência artificial. E a nossa expectativa é poder trocar ideias com as outras organizações parlamentares acerca de como estão tratando, né, desse tema tão importante como a IA. É um tema que, além de importante, é um tema difícil, é uma tecnologia de evolução muito rápida. Eu tenho certeza que está todo mundo, né, tendo bons problemas para resolver, né, em relação a como aproveitar essa tecnologia em benefício do parlamento, em benefício do cidadão, né, e no contexto de processos bastante exclusivos, que são aqueles que nós operamos no legislativo. Tá? Ansioso, então, para poder ouvir um pouquinho e, eventualmente, a gente fazer um relacionamento aqui com as pessoas para poder, né, nessa reunião e fora dela, trocar ideias e nos ajudarmos mutuamente a evoluir, né, nesse tema que é um tema, no mínimo, difícil, digamos assim.
Thank you so much, Tancredi, for your introduction. Peter, would you like to introduce yourself to us? Peter, you're mute.
Okay, can everybody hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Good morning. Luís, thank you very much for the kind invitation to attend today's workshop. Peter Finnegan is my name, and I am the Secretary General of the House of the Oireachtas Service and also the Clerk of the Dáil, which is the lower house in the Irish Parliament. Just in terms of kind of our own organisation here, we have around 700 staff, 700 political staff and 220 members in both our houses. So we're about 1,500, 1,600 in number. Over the last number of years, we've done an extensive amount of work on our digital transformation programme, and we're seeing the benefits of that now with systems as they go live on a pretty regular basis. About 18 months ago, 2 years ago, we turned our attention in a very serious way to cybersecurity because of some of the threats that we face there, the threats that we all, I suppose, have in common. And now we have to look at AI. Like some other colleagues who are at the very early stages of AI, I think James used a very nice expression in the foothills of AI, and I think we're with you, James, in those foothills. So today for me really is about kind of listening and learning from colleagues and hopefully making contact with people that we'll be able to work with one another in the future. So Luís, thank you very much for the opportunity to be here today.
Thank you so much for your presence also, Peter. Allow me to bring my first question to you, Jonathan, and then I will ask our colleagues to share the comments. In considering the long-term view for Parliament, we recognize the growing influence and potential of AI and other emerging technologies. These innovations promise to revolutionize various aspects of our lives, including the way parliamentary operations are conducted. I'd like to invite each one of you to share your views on the possible applications of AI in parliamentary operations. What do you envision as the most impactful and transformative uses of AI in this context, and how do you foresee these technologies shaping the future of the parliamentary process? If you can keep each response until 5 minutes, that would be much appreciated. Jonathan, would you like to kick off and start this round of questions?
I will definitely try to keep to 5 minutes. It's a very large topic, but I'll definitely try my hardest to keep to that. It's a fascinating growth trajectory that we're on with artificial intelligence, and if we look at that sort of the bell curve in terms of innovation, and if we look at, for example, how just even 6 months ago, or for example, 12 months ago, where we were with artificial intelligence and the growth in all the algorithms and other things along those lines, it's just absolutely phenomenal to actually look at the impact that it can actually potentially have. We're seeing a lot of movement, especially around data analytics and policy insights as well. So as an example, we were just recently doing some demonstrations with one of the parliaments as well, and they were asking, we could just ask normal questions to a chatbot, and that could be, oh, what were the key points in question time today? Or as an example, the another one would be the clerk of the House was actually saying, well, I want to know what the precedent is around something actually occurring as well. So there are a lot of sort of what I call generative AI applications, which we're seeing a lot of emerging trends with. And really, it's about the ability to identify patterns, the ability to identify trends and insights into your own parliamentary data. And what I find really interesting as part of the parliamentary data set is that, it can span, 150 plus years or even longer, depending on how long the actual parliament has actually been around for. So AI is really, really good in terms of analyzing large data volumes and large data sets as well. But, one of the key things around that is understanding what, for example, if we look at legislation or bills or those sort of other areas, we're starting to see now trends around, can we use historical legislative data and also other data from other parliaments as well to predict the potential impact of what new bills or policies, helping lawmakers really anticipate consequences and make more informed decisions as well. So we're seeing a lot more trends in terms of understanding, well, what did this country do around a certain policy? What did this country do around a certain policy? And actually then incorporating that into your own legislative decision-making processes as well. We're finding a lot more of that sort of collaborative use of open data because we're finding a lot more parliaments are actually publishing open data as well. So there is actually a lot of possibility to learn from other countries' implementations of certain bills or legislation, and then really driving that back in and saying, well, can we actually use that to make more informed decisions around, especially a lot around policy making or data analytics around policy insights as well. Hopefully that was about 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Jonathan, for keeping in time and for sharing your insights. Peter, would you like to share your thoughts on this question as well?
Sure, Luís. I suppose I might start by maybe just going back to last September when our management board went to an AI session with Accenture. As you probably know, Ireland would have quite a large tech sector, and Accenture have an AI centre in the centre of Dublin down in the Docklands. And what we saw down there was absolutely fascinating in terms of the potential of AI. It was very much kind of an introductory session for us, as senior managers in the organisation to, I suppose, open our eyes to AI and what it was about, what are the opportunities, what are the risks, etc. But what they did down there for us was kind of, they spent kind of a couple of days with a few very smart data scientists who wrote up some AI programs just on some of our data to give us a sense of what the potential was. And there was a couple of things, I suppose, that they did that were really fascinating. I think that would probably have fairly widespread applicability. Firstly, we have a parliamentary question system like kind of many legislatures, and in our case here we would have in the region of about 70,000 questions a year, which is quite a considerable number of questions for an assembly with 160 members. They developed an AI system for us which was able to draft and format parliamentary questions. And one of the big challenges we have is we're getting questions in various different formats and different standards and styles, etc. And in a sense, they were able to standardize all of that. You can see the potential for that, I suppose, just in terms of the savings for the administration here. And also, I suppose, the benefits for members. We're looking now in terms of the introduction of a new parliamentary question system down the road. So it's not inconceivable that there will be an AI component to that system, which will support members in their work. The second thing, which was kind of more impressive in a way, was they were able to produce an abstract for a Bill's Digest. We produce digests for all our bills. We have a research service here, a really good one, that analyzes bills, and before the bill is taken in the House, there's a bills digest with various information about the bill, the context, comparative studies, etc. And the bills digest contains an abstract and then the substantive part of the digest. Accenture were able to produce an abstract using kind of the information from the bill, explanatory memorandum, and some other open source data. So they said to us that with a bit more time, they could have actually produced the digest itself. So you're immediately seeing kind of the potential of AI in a parliamentary setting, and it does kind of, I suppose, open your eyes then to some of the other issues, which I know we'll get on to discuss later in terms of strategy and ethics and standards and so forth. But maybe I might just finish with one other kind of point that strikes me about it. I think AI has the potential to solve some of the problems that we've had as administrators for a long time, which we've never really been able to get on top of. So, for example, in our system, we would have backlogs of journals, parliamentary journals, which are the official record of the proceedings. And you can see the potential there in terms of AI, in kind of eliminating those backlogs pretty quickly. The other one from our point of view then is in terms of translation. We have two official languages in Ireland. The first official language is Irish, which is spoken by probably 5 or 10% of the population. But there's a constitutional requirement for us to translate all of our legislation into Irish. And that's quite a big challenge for us. And again, we have backlogs. And, we were talking about this very recently. And we can see kind of where AI is actually coming down the tracks in the future, and is going to be a really big support for us in that type of work. So look, that's a general sense. There's benefits for members in terms of AI. There's benefits to the institution in terms of the ongoing delivery of services. And then I suppose the third benefit is, to use an expression of a colleague of mine who describes some of these problems as gnarly problems. They're the really intractable problems that we all have, and I can really see the potential of AI in helping us crack some of those.
Thank you so much for your remarks, Peter. Graciela, would you like to share your thoughts on this matter as well? Graciela está sin son, está mudo.
¿Me pueden escuchar en inglés? ¿Sí? Ok.
Sí.
Bueno, primero quisiera empezar diciendo que la Cámara de Diputados de México tiene 500 legisladores, 250 hombres y 250 mujeres, por primera vez en la historia. Es un congreso 100% paritario. Y el staff es aproximadamente de 1,500 personas. Entonces, el staff en realidad es pequeño relativo a el número de miembros, al número de diputados. Y la inteligencia artificial, pues nosotros estamos empezando a desarrollar algo que va a ser parecido, digamos, al chat GPT, que nos va a permitir resolver una de las preguntas que más hacen los diputados y diputadas a los centros de estudio, a los centros de investigación, a los investigadores parlamentarios, y que tiene que ver con la viabilidad jurídica o la viabilidad presupuestal de las iniciativas que proponen los diputados y diputadas. Esa es la mayor parte del trabajo que hacen los investigadores parlamentarios. Entonces, con un instrumento como la inteligencia artificial, se va a reducir ese trabajo y va a hacer más productivo el trabajo de los centros de investigación, que entonces van a tener tiempo para hacer otro tipo de investigación más a profundidad, a más detalle en otros temas, ¿no? Y también es verdad, ahora que lo mencionaba Peter de Irlanda, déjenme decirles que en México el español no es el idioma oficial, es el idioma más utilizado, desde luego, pero hay 86 lenguas que todavía se hablan en todo el país. Y ahora en este gobierno se ha hecho un esfuerzo por hacer un mayor acercamiento a estas comunidades. El portal de la Cámara de Diputados, el portal ciudadano, está traducido a náhuatl y a maya, y la idea es traducirlo a las lenguas que son más habladas. Entonces también la inteligencia artificial nos va a poder ayudar para tener información y mayor cercanía a estas comunidades. Eso sería como mi primera participación al respecto. Muchas gracias.
Thank you so much, Graciela, for your opening considerations. Tancredi, would you like to share your thoughts on this first question as well? Tancredi?
Desculpa. Luís, a gente está com um probleminha, tem duas pessoas traduzindo simultaneamente no canal de português. Tá? Então, a gente podia pedir para eles se organizarem para ficar uma pessoa só, senão a gente até tem dificuldade de entender o que o colega está dizendo. Por exemplo, agora eu acabei não ouvindo a minha chamada. Mas, enfim,
Perfeito.
voltando ao tema, né? No Brasil, o Senado faz parte do Congresso Nacional e somos uma casa paritária com a Câmara dos Deputados e, basicamente, com relação ao processo legislativo, temos papéis muito similares, né? Viemos, ao longo do tempo, pesquisando alguma coisa com a IA mais tradicional, aquela IA, né, do machine learning, do aprendizado de máquina, e já vi alguns projetos no Senado em termos de reconhecimento de imagem, reconhecimento de fala e de voz, para identificação de orador, de presença na sessão, para transcrição de discurso e de falas, né? Isso tudo a gente já estava fazendo, classificação e distribuição de matérias pelas comissões com a IA tradicional. A chegada da IA generativa provocou uma comoção muito grande, né, na maneira como a gente vinha tratando a questão, e a gente, na verdade, nesse momento, está se debruçando sobre esse ponto, né, o que é a chegada da IA generativa e o que ela vai trazer de potenciais oportunidades para a gente trabalhar melhor, né, tanto os processos legislativos quanto os processos administrativos tradicionais da casa. E coisas como, por exemplo, produção automática de comparativo entre propostas, substitutivos e emendas a matérias parlamentares, produção semiautomática de atas e diários das nossas reuniões de comissão ou do plenário, a produção por exemplo, na área administrativa, né, transcrição de documentos históricos, né, que o colega também citou como sendo um problema, né, produção de documentos aqui na área administrativa para a licitação pública de bens e de serviços, classificação automática e recuperação de documentos administrativos, né, tudo isso são potenciais que nós precisamos, de fato, né, explorar de uma forma melhor, e a IA generativa, o ChatGPT, veio trazer uma quantidade muito grande de alternativas e novas maneiras de estar usando esse tipo de tecnologia. Nos preocupa, para terminar aqui esse primeiro bloco, especialmente de que maneira que a gente vai poder trabalhar a relação com o público, a relação com o cidadão, né, para que, em coisas como a transparência do processo legislativo, a forma como o parlamento se coloca perante a opinião pública, seja atendida de uma maneira um pouco melhor. O Brasil tem um programa antigo de transparência que a gente tem trabalhado, mas eu acredito que, especialmente, o ChatGPT pode trazer, né, uma janela assim, muito transformadora para essa atividade. E aí a gente ter, né, uma forma de estar se comunicando com o público, ouvindo e falando, né, de formas inovadoras e adensando e aprofundando um pouco o índice de democracia, né, no funcionamento do parlamento.
Thank you so much, Tancredi, for your considerations. James, would you like to share your thoughts on this matter as well?
Thank you very much, Luís. I think the first thing, I mean, I think there are a number of possible applications that are very exciting for sort of parliamentary services looking forward. Some really interesting points made by colleagues on the panel that I'll pick up on. The first point I was going to make, I think, was made by our colleagues from the Brazilian Parliament around the extent to which we're already using AI in speech-to-text technology. We're sort of rolling out more consistent use of, we're piloting more use of automatic speech recognition in coverage of our committees. and being able to produce text subtitles for our committee hearings is having a real impact on accessibility of these hearings, and having a real impact because we know that the way people access information and proceedings, often on their phones, often sitting on a train or on a bus, and being able to see real-time real-time text is a really important way of reaching out and in allowing the public to engage with our works. I think that's really exciting. I think the potential for AI use in legislative drafting is extremely exciting. I know last month, or at the end of October, there was an IPU conference on AI and legislative drafting. I think that took place. I'd be very interested to sort of see further what came out of that. But I think there's lots of ideas floating around there. I think we have to acknowledge that a lot of our administrative decisions are now made using AI and automated in that way, and ensuring that our legislative processes are able to take advantage of this technology and in many ways reflect the reality of what our administrative processes are doing, I think is very exciting. Very interested in colleagues' comments on, I think Peter's comments on the potential for AI use in parliamentary question drafting. I think that is a great potential opportunity. I think we also need to acknowledge the importance of sort of retaining the integrity of the system, of the question system, which is so key to holding governments to account, the key role of Parliament. And the question there is, are there risks that AI is bringing in around, are we ensuring that the origination of questions stays with the member and their offices? And we've got to be very, perhaps AI has a role, I think, in keeping us alive to the use of AI by those who are using the process as well. So I think that is an important point. Jonathan made a really important point around the importance of precedent and being able to research precedent in Parliament. And I think the capacity, and Peter's point about eliminating backlog certainly touched a nerve for me as well. And I think that really is fantastically exciting. And then lastly, the last sort of key area that has struck me is around analysing evidence that our select committees are very engaged with, and the ability to analyse large quantities of evidence, again, with all the safeguards that I'm sure we'll be talking about, is very important. Now, in terms of the sort of future shaping of the process, I was struck by, I think Jonathan made the important point around the bell curve of innovation, and we're just at the kind of on the left-hand side of that bell curve at the moment. So really, the sort of, we don't know where we will be in 6 months, in a year, in 5 years. But I think the key points that I'd like to sort of really sort of hone in on are, how we decide what future AI opportunities to take forward is going to be very important. And that's something, I think that's something I'm sort of thinking about at the moment, rather than actually what the opportunities may be, is do we have the structures in place to consider what they are? And I think it's about working across silos in Parliament, getting the right people in there and making the decisions, having the data indexers, the information management experts, the parliamentary experts, the transcription experts, our library staff, getting external input, sharing knowledge in events like this. And it's thinking about at what level we need to be getting sort of political, and we need to be making political and administrative decisions. I mean, there are clearly risks in the use of AI. So knowing at what the risk appetite of the organisation of the Parliament is, these are all very high-profile organisations with important, huge responsibilities for access to the public and etc. And ensuring that the integrity of the sort of legislative and political system. So, managing those risks, assessing the appetite for risk, I think is key. But also acknowledging that doing nothing is also a risk. So, AI creates opportunities and challenges. We have to take the opportunities, and if we ignore it, that is, we quickly become an irrelevant organisation. And I think the final point I'd make is really around that point around future shaping of processes and decisions is a small point, but I think including the skeptics in this discussion, along with the enthusiasts. We need everyone involved in looking to make the most of those opportunities, but also we need the awkward questions to be asked, and we need the difficult questions to be asked about are we retaining the integrity of our parliamentary processes, and what do we risk importing into our systems. So that's a very quick overview of an enormous enormous subject.
Thank you so much, James, for your comments and your remarks. And allow me to bring my second question to you, James. And I want to focus on the procedural domain now. In your view, what are the key procedural challenges and considerations in implementing these technologies within the existing framework of your particular parliament, which is the House of Commons? And to make it a little bit harder for you, how do you envision overcoming these challenges, not with technologies and the possible applications that you have today, but enabling the rules of procedure for the possible applications in the coming 2, 5, 10 years going forward? So how do you envision this challenge in areas such as drafting, committee work, plenary procedures? What are your considerations from the procedural point of view?
Thank you very much, Luís. I think these are incredibly important questions that, and as I sort of touched on, I think it's around I think the key procedural. I think the procedure will need to sort of follow the principle really. But we need the principle is we need to retain the integrity of our kind of political systems and our parliamentary processes. And I think there was a very good piece of work that was done by the Science and Innovation and Technology Committee in the House of Commons just before the summer, looking at governance in AI. And the key areas that they really brought out were the risks of bias, unknown bias being imported into the process, because we if we don't understand fully the tools that are being used, and I talked about there's a risk of those others participants in the political process who are not working for the Parliament using artificial intelligence to import their biases into the process, generating lots of material that looks like a lot of different submissions on a similar subject, and I think that is a challenge. We know that bias and hallucinations are a risk in all in AI systems. I think there are questions around transparency of the process, again stemming from our understanding of the AI machines that are being used and that are being used to generate material. I think there are questions around privacy and intellectual property that we need to bottom out, and that pose really important questions for us as we look at the process. There are questions for the parliamentary service in terms of what data we are sharing ourselves with AI machines. We haven't yet seen it, but I think we are in the United Kingdom expecting an election in the next year. I think other colleagues around on the panel are also expecting elections, I think, soon. The risk of deep fake, that we've seen some examples, I think, of some of the potential for deep fake and the impact that may have on our political processes. I think these are all big challenges and big risks. I think there's also a big question, speaking from a sort of perspective of an official in the House of Commons, that as we begin to embrace this technology, are we getting the right tools? That there are risks to the parliamentary administration of going for the wrong solutions, and possibly as we embrace a new area of technology, becoming overly dependent on certain external providers. And I think that is a risk to the Parliament as a whole. So what can we do to investigate that. I think we need to ensure, as I said, I think in the last discussion, that our service is sort of nimble in responding to the challenges that we're facing. We need to ensure that we've got the governance correct in making those decisions, and ensuring that the right people are in the room making those decisions, and also providing advice to staff. We've produced a do's and don'ts of using AI for parliamentary staff, which is hopefully has been helpful. Getting those structures in place, I think, is the key. So I think that you've probably heard enough from me from this panel. I have to nip out for 1 second, but I will be straight back to rejoin the discussion.
Thank you so much, James, for your considerations. Graciela, would you like to share your thoughts on this matter?
Sí, claro. Bueno, como habían mencionado, ¿no? Son 500 miembros de la Cámara de Diputados, 1.500 staff alrededor. El staff es pequeño, precisamente por eso es que pues no es necesariamente tan consultado para generar iniciativas, ¿no? Entonces, muchas de las iniciativas no vienen bien soportadas con información, con antecedentes, ¿no? O con una buena investigación. Entonces, es ahí precisamente, o sea, en esa parte del procedimiento, ¿no? Que es desde el inicio, desde cómo se integra una iniciativa, donde la inteligencia artificial precisamente puede ser de utilidad. Primero porque puede integrar información o experiencia de otros países que han legislado sobre cierta materia, pero también porque puede integrar pues la experiencia pasada en el Congreso de México, ¿no? Precisamente por eso lo que estamos haciendo en este momento en el Congreso de México es todo el texto que tenemos de iniciativas que se han presentado en el pasado, estamos empezando a integrarlas en una base de datos para que la inteligencia artificial la pueda retomar. Pero también además tenemos el 25 años de video, porque el canal del Congreso de México tiene 25 años. Entonces, todo ese video también estamos empezando a integrarlo. Esto es un reto que pues, nos va a tomar mucho tiempo, pero que es necesario porque es ahí donde está sobre todo la memoria histórica, institucional, porque si bien es cierto que hay algunos funcionarios en la Cámara de Diputados que tienen 20, 25 años trabajando, la verdad es que el staff técnico de diputados y diputadas no tiene tantos años, tienen 1, 2, 3 años tal vez, porque recuerden que por primera vez en la historia, en 2021, los diputados se reeligieron de manera consecutiva, ¿no? Entonces, había una rotación constante, muy frecuente entre el staff técnico y pues eso por supuesto que nos hacía pues un congreso menos eficiente, menos efectivo, porque pues la memoria institucional se perdía, ¿no? Entonces ahora con la inteligencia artificial nos va a ayudar a integrar pues el texto y también todo el video para cuando haya consultas y que la inteligencia artificial lo pueda procesar, pero siempre de la mano del staff técnico, ¿no? Porque lo que nosotros no vemos es que no lo vemos todavía, es que la inteligencia artificial vaya a sustituir a funcionarios públicos o al staff técnico. No estamos viendo eso. Lo que vemos es que es una herramienta que los va a hacer más productivos.
Thank you so much, Graciela, for your considerations on this topic. Tancredi, would you like to share your thoughts as well?
Ok, Luís. Com relação à integração de ferramentas de inteligência artificial rotina, né, do parlamento, a gente tem duas situações bastante distintas, né? Digamos, a IA tradicional, apesar de ter pouco tempo, já tem uma IA tradicional, né? Essa IA, essa da machine learning, do aprendizado de máquina, ela é uma tecnologia um pouco mais madura e, nesse sentido, um pouco mais convencional. Você pode construir, né, um código aqui que faça determinada coisa, que ele preveja, por exemplo, algum tipo de informação para o futuro, para que ele possa também, do outro lado, descobrir um padrão, né, dentro de um grupo de dados, coisa dessa natureza. Você integra isso nos seus sistemas tradicionais, né? Isso é o que acontecia com o aprendizado de máquina. O advento do chat GPT e da inteligência artificial generativa, ela trouxe uma mudança muito grande nesse quadro, né? Nosso desafio nesse momento é entender de que forma que os nossos processos vão poder se integrar, né, aos processos que hoje trazem a IA generativa para o nosso mundo. Então, você hoje assina, né, um GPT 4.0 de natureza corporativa, né, e há uma dificuldade muito grande de você colocar isso dentro do seu processo de trabalho, né? Você acaba tendo que trabalhar como se fosse uma ferramenta lateral, né? Alguma coisa a side. Então, essa é uma dificuldade que a gente tem grande, né, no sentido de explorar isso aí, mas a impressão que a gente tem é que a IA generativa, nesse momento, o chat GPT, ele está sofrendo, né, vou usar uma metáfora da cosmologia, uma fase de inflação acelerada, né? Ele está crescendo e se transformando com uma rapidez muito grande, e a gente tem dificuldade de prever de que forma que ele vai acabar se estabilizando, se é que vai se estabilizar no futuro, de que maneira a gente vai poder trazer, né, toda esse ferramental para o nosso sistema de trabalho, digamos, mais processual, mais convencional. Então, esse eu acho que é um grande desafio que a gente tem hoje, né? E integrar isso, né, e descobrir de que forma que a gente pode aproveitar as oportunidades que essa integração tem para fazer diferença com relação tanto ao processo legislativo quanto ao processo administrativo interno das casas, que você sabe, consome uma quantidade muito grande de recursos humanos e a gente tem interesse de aumentar a produtividade nessa área, como também em abrir portas para a comunicação com o público, né? O colega da Casa dos Comuns do Reino Unido falou muito bem acerca dos riscos que se coloca, né? A inteligência artificial coloca riscos para a gente de duas formas. Ela consegue trabalhar a informação de uma maneira falsa, com grande credibilidade, isso é um risco, né? E também os nossos dados corporativos não podem ser colocados de qualquer forma, né, em função das diversas vertentes que o processo comercial de IA tem adotado ultimamente. Então, esse é um risco acessório, né? Eu acredito que a gente, nesse momento, está tendo que analisar isso aqui. Esse é um desafio para todo mundo. Acredito que ninguém tem uma solução muito pronta para isso, mas é uma coisa que, para nós, chama muito a atenção. E é uma das prioridades que nós temos hoje, né, é observar a evolução da inteligência artificial de natureza generativa e descobrir de que forma que a gente vai poder aproveitá-la melhor. Não só do ponto de vista de como usá-la, mas também de como integrar os nossos sistemas e processos convencionais.
Thank you, Tancredi, for your considerations and remarks. Peter, would you like to share your considerations on this topic as well? I think you're muted, Peter.
Apologies, I'm back on now. I was just listening there to the contributions of colleagues on just over the last couple of minutes, and there's a few things I suppose that immediately come to mind. I think the big issue that I would identify is the issue around trust. When you kind of think about parliaments, they're institutions that the public has to be able to trust. So Graciela mentioned the parliamentary TV service that is 25 years old in Mexico, and we have a similar service here, similar kind of age. And when we introduced it, I suppose one of the big driving forces was it was an unmediated service. So the public could actually just see for themselves what was being said in Parliament, and they could make their mind up on it without anybody offering a commentary or a critique of it. And things like that, I suppose, are very important in terms of parliamentary operations. Similarly, like if we go back decades, and we would say the UK have had the tradition of Hansard, which was the debate where, you know, prior to modern technology, people read the proceedings of the House and they made up their own minds based on what they read. And trust is a pretty fundamental thing for parliamentary institutions. And I suppose earlier today I was at a presentation just on cyber and the whole issue of kind of cyber attacks and kind of particularly during kind of elections, which many of us kind of face now over the next 12 to 18 months came up. But in approaching AI and its introduction into parliamentary activity, like we have to be extremely careful, I think, that it doesn't result in any undermining of trust within our institutions. Because if you undermine trust, you undermine public confidence, and you have a huge, big problem for you in terms of the democratic functioning of your state. Like, from my perspective, I think there's a process now where we have to, I suppose, build trust and confidence in AI. And I would see us kind of focusing AI applications on what I would describe as non-core parliamentary activities. So there's obviously potential in around the legislative area, which we all kind of recognize. But perhaps it might be better to focus on some of the other areas. So say a typical example, say in Ireland, is that we now have 10% of our population who are not born in Ireland, which Ireland has traditionally been a country of emigration. It's now a country of immigration. So we would have, in the last number of years, we have quite a number of Brazilians working in Ireland. We have, in the last 2 years, a large number of Ukrainians who have made their home in Ireland. And AI has a huge potential in terms of kind of reaching out to all of these people in the population where English is not necessarily their first language. And it's a very productive way of using AI, but it's also a very safe way of using AI. And I think if we can successfully implement AI applications in areas like that, that will give us the confidence then to move more towards core parliamentary functions, such as our parliamentary question system and our legislative system. So I suppose, to be honest, I kind of see Parliament as a series of concentric circles, and we start at the outermost circle in terms of AI, and we work our way in slowly towards the centre at a pace that we're all comfortable with, and it will go at different paces in different institutions. That's all I would say. Thanks, Luís.
Thank you so much, Peter, for your remarks and your considerations. Jonathan, I think you have a very hard job now on closing this round with your thought. Please feel free to use the floor and deliver your remarks.
I'll definitely try. I said, there's some very, very good topics just being discussed by the panel as well. I think I'd probably like to sort of add on to Peter's comments as well. Trust is really important, and how do you actually then have a base which you can then work off in artificial intelligence to really establish trust? And I'd like to sort of use a bit of a term in here, which is around the concept of what we call grounding in artificial intelligence. So the concept of grounding in artificial intelligence is really the practice of, and I'll sort of quote this as well, is the practice of ensuring that, for example, AI tools return results that are accurate, i.e. grounded in facts, rather than those which are statistically probable or pleasing to the user. So, it's a really interesting one when we're looking at the use of parliamentary data in artificial applications for procedural side of things or for public engagement or anything like that, is that, it's understanding that the data has to be, a fact, and because that establishes the trust. So when we are looking at, for example, generative AI approaches, whenever we use generative AI in our applications, we might say, what was the latest bill amendment for, this particular bit of legislation? It's really important now that we include citations to the actual original content, because A, we want to make sure that A, it's an official source of parliamentary data, but also B, we're not using, say, some other copyrighted material from this other person, who has no relation to Parliament as well. So, when we look at sort of the implications around that, we really do need to make sure that all of this information that we're really talking about is grounded, to the Parliament's data sets. You can leverage what they call an LLM or a large language model, but you never have to share your data with that large language model as well. So utilizing your own parliamentary data, is really, really important, because that is the fact. As sort of Peter was saying, the traditional approach of Hansard, that is the official record of Parliament. So utilizing your official sources as part of this whole process to really engage with procedure, to engage with all those sort of other areas, I find is, what we sort of really need to strive for in any adoption of artificial intelligence, as an example.
Thank you so much, Jonathan, for your considerations. Before I go to the next question, I saw your hand raised, James. You wish to...
No, sorry, it was a mistake. I was closing down another window that popped up, but apologies.
Thank you. Peter, let me focus on my next question in one particular word that many of you shared in the previous response, which is trust. And I had written this question before, but even if I didn't, I would certainly bring something similar for our discussion right now. I remember an interview with the philosopher Yuval Harari, where he has highlighted the potential risks in the interaction between humans and machines within the democratic processes, particularly concerning how unawareness of this interaction might undermine public trust and democracy itself. So my question to you is, as we look forward in the future with the integration of AI and other emerging technologies in parliaments, it's not just a matter of the technology advancement, but also the democratic evolution of the institution. So my question to you is, what are the most important guardrails to be taken in the present to ensure that future deployment of these technologies strengthens rather than undermines a functioning parliamentary democracy?
Thank you, Luís. You don't believe in asking easy questions. Look, I suppose in terms of the guardrails, and back to my earlier point about trust, I think the starting point has to be in the ethical space, that we all have to do some work around the ethical use of AI, and what we can do and won't do in terms of the application of AI in our institutions. And I think that's a really important piece of foundational work for the introduction, the more widespread introduction to AI into the institution. I suppose having done that piece of work, then I think your next stage is the development of your strategy, so that people understand exactly how AI will be used within your institution, within that kind of ethical framework. I suppose the third guardrail I would think is important is in around your governance system, that you're monitoring the use and the application of AI within the organization. And then finally, I think things like transparency and accountability are really important aspects as well, that we're accountable and we are transparent in our use of AI. So for example, the point that Jonathan made about the usage of citations, that level of kind of transparency is important, and it builds confidence in the integrity of what we're producing. So for me, they are the core issues in terms of kind of potential guardrails going forward, Luís.
Thank you so much, Peter, for your remarks and your considerations. Tancredi, would you like to share your thoughts on this question as well?
Luís, eu gostei muito e acho que eu concordo integralmente com as colocações anteriores com relação à questão do risco de confiança pública, né? E vou até, nesse sentido, abordar um outro lado da questão, né? Já ultrapassando aquilo que já foi dito, porque é em sinal de concordância, que é um uso ativo da transparência exatamente para reforçar essa confiança e reforçar o padrão democrático de atuação do parlamento, né? Acho que as ferramentas de IA elas vão poder do ponto de vista da transparência passiva, né, elas vão poder ajudar muito, né, a que o cidadão possa entender o funcionamento do parlamento, entender o conteúdo e alcance das decisões que ele toma. Acho que ferramentas como linguagem simples, por exemplo, podem ser agregadas nesse contexto para que a gente possa ter uma complexidade que seja administrável do ponto de vista da opinião pública geral, do indivíduo médio, e que a gente não tenha a linguagem técnica, que é uma coisa relevante para o parlamento, mas como a única forma de abordar os conteúdos de que trata o parlamento. Okay? Então, eu acho que desse ponto de vista da transparência passiva, a gente podia trabalhar por aí. Do ponto de vista da transparência ativa, acho que o problema é um pouco mais difícil, né? Mas até porque o risco sistêmico com relação à credibilidade da administração pública e a solidez da democracia não está contido no ambiente do parlamento. É uma coisa sistêmica que ela envolve, né, todo o conjunto de governo e da própria sociedade. Nesse sentido, talvez valesse a pena a gente avaliar de que forma nós poderíamos estar tendo uma capacidade um pouco melhor de identificar a desinformação, né, e reagir de uma maneira um pouco mais proativa e fazer com que a nossa atuação dentro de mídias sociais, de perfis públicos, etc., tivesse um pouco dessa preocupação de identificar aquilo que é desinformação e de trabalhar para repor essa informação de uma maneira um pouco melhor. Talvez não eristicamente, né? Talvez não fazendo um debate público sobre isso, mas aportando sempre que uma desinformação acontecer, aportando, né, um conteúdo um pouco melhor e, como disseram colegas, um conteúdo que possa declarar as suas fontes, né? Que eu acho que, de fato, é o ponto que nos une aqui todos, né? Nós precisamos de ter um solo estável para isso, e aí, né, as fontes da atividade parlamentar são o principal.
Thank you, Tancredi, for your considerations and your remarks about this topic. James, would you like to share your thoughts on this as well?
Sure, thank you, and thank you to all the contributors so far on this question. I think we've touched on the really key point. The trust, I think, is absolutely fundamental, and I think that is absolutely key. Getting the governance right is absolutely right. Accountability, transparency, I think these are all absolutely key principles and guardrails that we need to sort of hold on to moving forward. The 2 points I think I'd add are thinking that I think maintaining the principle that artificial intelligence is a supplement to human intelligence. It is not a replacement for, and particularly in the context of parliaments, this is about, an individual has been elected to Parliament to represent their region or their area or whatever, and they have that sort of the human intelligence is absolutely key in this, and we cannot lose sight of that. The other point, I think, and the other thing, I think it's not necessarily a guardrail, but I think it's a form of reassurance, is that parliaments they're very much in-person institutions. And I think we found during the pandemic that we could bring in some brilliant technology. And I think all of our parliaments were revolutionized in terms of using technology to facilitate virtual attendance by members of parliament and by and other participants in the process. But I think for me, the big lesson that I think we took away in the House of Commons was that, that is never a replacement for it. It can open up fantastic opportunities, but I think for most members of parliament, they still very much prefer, where possible, that in-person interaction. And I think that's something that we should never lose. And that really has to remain core to the way parliaments do their business. So I think it's those two principles: one extra guardrail, and one, I think, probably a sense of reassurance that this is what members of parliament are in there to make the world better. That's what they're all about, and they want to do that by interacting and engaging in debate in their parliaments, and that's got to remain the core of what they're doing.
Thank you, James, for your considerations on this topic. Jonathan, would you like to share your thoughts on this?
Yep, another hard one to finish off as well. So there's been some really good comments, especially around guardrails and around these sort of processes as well. I'd like to probably include 2 additional guardrails, and we sort of highly recommend, as part of any adoption of artificial intelligence, is that what is the ongoing impact? So we recommend, for example, putting in regular audits, impact assessments, and also adapting your policies and regulations to emerging challenges and opportunities related to AI as well. I sort of bring it back down to my original comment. We're at the cusp of this innovative curve, and it's going to be changing and adapting quite frequently, and there's going to be new emerging challenges. We are using artificial intelligence in our daily lives right now, but we don't necessarily fully understand what those challenges are until they're potentially realized as well. So, conducting regular audits of your AI systems to really assess their performance, the fairness, and compliance with ethical guidelines as well. So I always look at measurement. So when you're actually looking at putting in an AI system, you need to understand what are you actually then going to be measuring for those sort of other things and your compliance as well. Also, another really interesting part, coming back down to the ethical framework side of things as well, is understanding that it probably is important to perform an impact assessment as well, or perform ongoing impact assessments around evaluating the social, political, and economic implications of AI adoption within the legislative context as well. So, if you're looking at, well, what is the people impact? In terms of, we're not looking at replacing jobs here. We're looking at, creating efficiency as an example. So making sure that a tool which we're actually putting in place, again, as sort of James says, to supplement Parliament, not to replace Parliament, to supplement Parliament, is actually not negatively impacting your Parliament as well, because we've actually introduced that tool.
Thank you so much, Jonathan, for your consideration. Oh, please.
I know that's all right. I think it's fine. I had one more sort of other comment is around a guardrail is around testing. It might sound a little bit sort of not necessarily technical, but test your AI models is testing and having an actual testing strategy that is actually defined for artificial intelligence. If you're using artificial intelligence, you want to try to break it in a meaningful way. And getting, and what we call, they call it a concept called red teaming. So, and what that means is that you're trying to do a adversarial attack against that. So you're trying to ask it, say if you're using generative AI, you're trying to create or phrase a question that will try to break the model. So, incorporating your standard security testing, your standard, and again, security is a massive sort of, topic at the moment. Incorporating the security part of that testing and the AI part of that testing together to make sure that, again, comes back down to trust. You want to make sure that you've tried everything to make sure that that model which you're actually developing and utilizing is actually trustworthy.
Thank you so much, Jonathan, for your considerations. Graciela, I have a very difficult job for you, which is to close this round with your comments. Please feel free to use the floor with your thoughts and considerations.
Sí, gracias. Voy a retomar precisamente lo que algunos colegas han comentado, en particular lo referente a la confianza que es necesaria y también a la supervisión. Sobre todo, yo hablo mucho de los centros de estudio de la Cámara de Diputados porque pues es algo, es un proyecto que hemos venido fortaleciendo, en el que hemos venido trabajando, ¿no? Y bueno, va a ser necesario construir protocolos precisamente para darle confianza a los legisladores sobre cómo se está utilizando la inteligencia artificial a la hora de investigar para las iniciativas que van a construir, ¿no? Entonces, es necesario elaborar estos protocolos, pero también capacitar continuamente a los investigadores parlamentarios, porque como bien comentó Jonathan, estamos utilizando ya la inteligencia artificial de manera diaria, de diferentes formas, ¿no? Pero tal vez no estamos sacando su mayor potencial, porque no tenemos, no todo el mundo tiene como mucha idea de cómo hacerlo. Entonces, estar cerca pues de quienes la desarrollan, de quienes están haciendo el mejor trabajo con ello y capacitar al personal sobre cómo utilizarla, sobre cómo sacar mayor provecho de ella. Me parece que es muy importante la parte de capacitación. Y bueno, yo hasta aquí lo dejaría y también voy a tener que dejarlos porque tengo que estar a las 9 de la mañana ya en el Parlamento de México en una reunión a las 9 de la mañana y pues hago 30 minutos de mi casa al Parlamento. Entonces, pues muchas gracias, ha sido un placer compartir este tiempo con ustedes y pues mucha suerte y éxito en la adopción de este nuevo instrumento que estoy segura va a ser en beneficio de todos nosotros.
Thank you so much, Graciela, for your comments and for your participation. Well, allow me then to follow my next question to you, Tancredi. A critical aspect for the implementation of AI and other technologies is the strategic financial planning and resource allocation. What considerations are essential for developing a robust strategic financial plan that ensures the successful adoption and sustained use of AI tools within the constraints of parliamentary budgets?
Bom, Luís, essa questão inaugura aquele...
Tancredi, só um instante. Graciela, would you like to answer that? I thought you had to leave, but if you can.
Perdón, sí puedo responder esta pregunta y entonces sí me voy. Rápidamente decir que, bueno, en términos de presupuesto no veo tanto un problema, no porque nos sobre el dinero, sino porque, digamos, como somos un poder autónomo, tenemos un cierto presupuesto que podemos manejar. El reto para nosotros está en el cambio de administración, porque como decía, el próximo año tenemos elecciones, se va a renovar el Congreso y es probable que una parte importante del staff de la Cámara de Diputados salga, ¿no? Entonces, ahora nosotros tenemos un plan de acción, tenemos un plan sobre qué hacer respecto de la inteligencia artificial y probablemente lo vamos a entregar a alguien y no sabemos si ese alguien va a continuar con eso o va a empezar desde cero, ¿no? Entonces, no lo vemos tanto como un problema de presupuesto, sino de seguimiento del proyecto. Eso sería respecto del Congreso de México. Y pues bueno, ahora sí, colegas, I have to say goodbye and thank you very much for everything.
Thank you so much, Graciela. Thank you for your time. Muchas gracias. Tancredi, would you like to comment on that? Apologies for the interruption. If you can return to your previous reasoning.
Acho que o James também falou que precisava sair mais cedo. Talvez você queira dar a oportunidade dele comentar essa questão antes de sair.
James, please feel free to use the floor.
Yeah, sorry, apologies, Luís, that I need to go to another meeting in 5 minutes. But I think just to sort of pick up on those last themes, I think the challenge of making sure parliamentary IT systems are resourced and are set up to embrace the challenges of AI, I think is incredibly important. We've embraced taken on a transforming digital program in the House of Commons. I think something very similar has been happening in the Oireachtas as well. Basically looking at sustainability of funding for our IT services, ensuring we've got the right governance in place, ensuring that the teams across Parliament have access to the tools that they need, I think is clearly absolutely key in this area. Understanding user needs, prioritizing digital needs in our allocation of resources, having a single data approach to the way that we manage our parliamentary data, and I think partly it's a kind of greater understanding within the House service of the importance of digital tools and a greater level of leaders who fully understand and are sort of fluent in discussing and confident in discussing digital issues. I think that's absolutely crucial, and ensuring that we're able to kind of maintain that ongoing sort of capability to transform and meet the innovation that we're going to be facing. I mean, I think, sorry, just a final point before I really apologize, I do need to run, is I think looking forward, I'm really keen that we should keep collaborating in this sort of environment. I think it's been really useful hearing the exchange of ideas, and we can learn from each other. Real priority for us to keep our skills updated and ensure that staff understand the context in which we're working and the challenges, and feel confident and supported in embracing those challenges, rolling out sensible guidance, and as I say, comparing notes with other parliaments. I think that'll be really, really useful and really valuable, but also with other sectors, other areas of work. But apologies, I will be around for another 3 minutes, and we're really interested in the further thoughts. But if I don't get the chance to say it again, many thanks, Luís, for organising this session. It's been really, really interesting, and great to work with everyone else on the panel. Thank you.
Thank you so much, James, for your participation and for your considerations. Tancredi, would you like to share your thoughts on this question?
Ok. Tem ponto fundamental que, como disse para você, a gente está agora andando em terreno não mapeado, né? A questão de como é que vamos fazer, né, para alocar recursos para o futuro, de que forma que essas tecnologias vão poder evoluir e de que forma elas poderão ser aproveitadas pelos nossos processos. Nós estamos numa discussão interna muito grande sobre esse tipo de situação e eu já posso dizer que algumas conclusões têm surgido, né? São conclusões ainda provisórias, mas acho que são relevantes e vale a pena trocar uma ou duas aqui com vocês. Uma delas é que a grande riqueza, né, de oportunidades que traz a ideia de você estar usando, especialmente essa nova geração de IA, que é a IA generativa, ela reside na base dos processos. Então, a gente imagina que ninguém, né, no centro da corporação vai poder substituir, né, a experimentação que a base pode fazer dessas ferramentas, né, e a indicação, né, de oportunidades que eles vão fazer para nós. Então, na minha ideia, e eu acho que, de uma certa forma, no Senado isso está começando a virar um consenso, que a gente precisa equilibrar a liberdade de experimentar, deixar, né, a ponta do processo experimentar, né, evidentemente com as precauções de segurança, enfim, né, com tudo aquilo que é necessário para que isso não envolva um risco fora de controle. E, a partir daí, né, você pode dar um suporte privilegiado a determinadas soluções, determinadas oportunidades que forem selecionadas dentro desse âmbito, né? É claro que a estratégia corporativa, a partir do centro, ela pode definir, ela pode identificar oportunidades interessantes, né? Mas eu acho que ela não deveria fechar os olhos e os ouvidos para aquilo que surge lá na base. E, nesse sentido, a gente teria duas vertentes, né, com relação à alocação de orçamento de recursos, né? Poder financiar essa intervenção da ponta, né, essa experimentação, esses laboratórios, né, inferir, né, de que forma a gente pode ter necessidade de natureza um pouco mais corporativa e estratégica também para serem aproveitadas, e, a partir disso, né, aproveitando uma estratégia um pouco mais dedutiva e outra um pouco mais indutiva, um pouco mais de inferência, aproveitar todo esse conjunto, né, para selecionar as oportunidades em que a gente vai investir o nosso orçamento. De fato, né, aqui é muito menos uma questão da abundância ou não do orçamento, mas de que maneira a gente vai poder fazer um uso apropriado dele, né? Lembrando que, enfim, toda organização pode inovar, né? E seria muito ruim que a gente não desse à organização essa oportunidade.
Thank you so much, Tancredi, for your considerations and your thoughts. Peter, would you like to share your considerations on this topic as well? I think you're muted, Peter.
Thank you, Luís. What comes to mind, I suppose, straight away is budgets and finance as a big challenge for all of us, because I suppose firstly, I think, budgets generally are coming under increased pressure with cost of living, inflation, etc., and pressures in other budgetary areas. And then we've all been trying to do a lot in IT in recent years, whether that's digital transformation or whether it's cyber. And now we have this new technology that we're told that we have to invest kind of significant sums of money into in the coming years. And whereas we would have had an intuitive understanding of things like digital transformation, and certainly on the cyber front, we know that we have to do it. There's a risk element on cyber. The AI is something that it's hard to kind of explain to people when you're looking for the sums of money that are needed to successfully implement AI solutions. And I suppose just to pick up on a point then that Márcio made there, which I think is really relevant, it's around this issue of freedom to experiment, okay? And that's the space that we're in at the moment in AI. And parliamentary institutions, by their nature, are not institutions where you have a high degree of freedom to experiment. You can't afford project failure in a parliamentary institution, because you mightn't get the opportunity to run a second project if you have a major IT failure. And that's one of the big challenges, I think, with AI. And I suppose, in a sense, that's why we have to proceed kind of at a cautious pace, let's say. And we have what might be described as kind of a sensible progression in terms of the implementation of AI. So, the sensible progression is in terms of kind of things like proving the concept, first of all, that we're happy with that. We do the evaluation on that, as Jonathan said, audits and things like that. We move from that then into the pilot phase, where we pilot some of the technology, see how we get on that. And only when we've successfully completed those first two stages do we move to the third stage, which is kind of the development of systems, AI systems in our institutions. So for me, that they are the challenges and the issues that we probably all face.
Thank you so much, Peter, for your remarks and your considerations. We are a little bit over time, so we wouldn't have the last question. So, Jonathan, you have an even harder task now. That's not even to comment just on this matter, but with you, we close this panel discussion today. So please feel free to share your thoughts and considerations about this topic.
Yeah, definitely. It's an interesting one, I think, as sort of Peter was sort of saying as well, is that it's hard to quantify artificial intelligence, and because everyone's got a different opinion of what artificial intelligence is, because it is an emerging technology in terms of the application within a parliament space. But I think, though, it really does boil down to proper governance as well. So understanding that artificial intelligence is there to supplement, not to replace parliamentary procedure. So understanding where your use cases are, and starting off with a small use case, experimenting with it, and then driving from there as well. But one of the other sort of things I'd like to sort of close with is really about like the impact and change management and the cultural shift, which that can actually then introduce into a parliamentary context as well. Parliaments are very traditional, and they've been operating in certain ways and procedures and policies, etc. And by the introduction of artificial intelligence, you can see quite a huge change management and a cultural shift. And you've got to recognize, I think, as part of that sort of overall budgeting and resource allocation side of things, is that you may require additional change management support to understand that within the parliamentary context as well. So you're trying to garner support, for different, as sort of has been sort of described. You want adversarial people and you want the people who really want to push AI as well. But understanding that there are lots of different opinions and a lot of different views, because if we don't agree on the strategy and don't agree on the overall implementation, the project is doomed to fail. So if you don't have those sort of repeatable processes and those sort of audits and the testability side of things, because you just, everyone jumps on what I call the bandwagon and tries to implement artificial intelligence, it needs to be done in a structured way, is probably my final sort of closing thoughts.
Thank you so much, Jonathan, for your considerations. Allow me to thank all of you, Graciela Báez from the Chamber of Deputies of Mexico, Mr. James Rhys from the House of Commons of the United Kingdom, Jonathan Ruckert from NovaWorks in Australia, Márcio Tancredi from the Federal Senate of Brazil, and Mr. Peter Finnegan from the Houses of the Oireachtas in Ireland for the very enlightening panel discussion for me. I have to say, I had much more to learn from you than the other way around. I took a lot of notes here on the very interesting considerations that you brought. So my appreciation and in the name of all the colleagues watching us for your time and your participation today.